Welcome to a short screencast on how to run Camunda on Pivotal Cloud Foundry PCF. There was another part already available where we talked about how to run Camunda as part of a Java application in Spring Boot on PCF. But this one today is about non-Java environments. So today I want to do a Node.js example. But I'm working on a C# example as well. So it will be more or less comparable. So what we will do is we will run this very easy workflow. So it's not about the workflow, it's a very easy workflow, just doing a kind of a sysout, right? And today's approach is that we want to run Camunda somewhere on PCF as an own deployment. So that's just something which is there as a service, and then we can connect to it via REST API, and then we build an application in Node.js which contains the workflow, which contains all the logic which is necessary in order to do that. The deployment here will involve a bit of Java, so you don't have to really code in Java, but it will, I mean, Camunda is written in Java, so it will be a Java deployment there, but it's relatively easy to do. I walk you through that. We're currently also working on a managed service within Camunda, so I expect that to be available later this year, and then you can like really have it as a managed service and don't have to care about running that yourself at all. But for the moment, we have to do that first. So how can we run Camunda as a service? It's basically described here. And the main idea, it's what I said. It's a Java application, but it's relatively easy to do. I don't want to go into the details. The basic idea is just it has a dependency to the to Camunda, the so-called Spring Boot starter, which basically does a lot of magic. And there's not really code involved here. The only code I added is later on for PCF in order to discover the database. We talk about that in a second. So you can just copy that exactly like it is and run it for yourself. So there are two ways of doing that. The first would be just do it locally. So if we go to this one, so the engine as a service, what you can do, and it's actually written here in the docs, so you can just say, hey, maven clean install, that will build it, and then you can like push it on PCF if you like to. I will do the first part, so I would do maven install. That does a build of the whole Camunda platform. What it results in one jar file. So a single file which contains everything that's needed in order to run it, and that's also deployed on PCF later on. You can see that if you go to the target folder. So if you look at there's the Camunda on PCF as a service jar. That's exactly the one we need. If you have Java, you can run that locally, like Java jar, and then just run that, and that will kick off Camunda locally, running on port 8080, which is the default. And that's all you need to do here. I could now run, like exactly what's here, Cloud Foundry push, and that will push it to Cloud Foundry. In order to do that, I use Pivotal Web Services, which is the hosted version of that. So it's really a cloud service. What I need is actually, first of all, the database. So if I go back to my nice little document here, I need this database first, and I use that as a service. If I'm on the hosted platform, I can just use the marketplace, and there's so-called Elephant SQL, which is Postgre as a service. I can use a free version to get started, and I have to give it a name, which is CamundaDB. I come back to that in a second. So that's the database. This is there, and if I look back in the example, what's part of the project, it's a manifest file that's used for PCF in order to deploy things. And what you can see is that the service is linked. So that's exactly the same name I just entered here, like CamundaDB. And then PCF basically does all the magic in the background to combine them two. And that's also why I needed that one like Java class, which was part of that, which uses a couple of Spring magic in order to hook that up, so to really connect to the right URL, to have the credentials for the database available. So that's all done in the background. You don't have to care about that, which is actually pretty cool and pretty powerful. So as soon as I have that, I could just say cf push, I don't want to do that here right away because I want to walk you through a different possibility, which I find very useful, especially if you're not into Java and probably don't have a local Java environment. You could leverage a CI/CD pipeline in order to do that. Whatever you have, might be Jenkins or I don't care. I use Travis here because that's relatively handy to work together with GitHub. So what I have in my GitHub repository is on the root level, because we need to have it on the root level. It's a Travis file in order to configure my CI/CD. I say, hey, I want to do a Java build. Travis can only work like in root directory, so I basically have this in the root directory, but what I want to build is the engine as a service, so I have to go into that directory, and then I do exactly what I do locally as well. I make a maven clean package, so that creates that Uber jar, which just started locally. I basically define a couple of things, and then I say, hey, and when you're ready with building that, deploy it on Cloud Foundry. That's the API endpoint for Pivotal Web Services. I have to specify username, password, organization, and space. That basically relates to what I have here. I'm in the organization here, and that's the space. Username and password, I think that's very obvious. And then on Travis, I can define for that task these variables. So they're not like hard-coded in there, which is kind of a secret way of doing that. And as soon as I prepare that, what I can do is I can trigger a build here on master. So as soon as we do that, we should be able actually to see that running. It might take a bit. I mean, it's still in the cloud, and I'm not paying for that, so they might queue me a bit more. But we come back to that in a second, and then we should have Camunda running on PCF. So that's already half of the story. So what we have is we are having Camunda running. If we go back, that's basically this part. And now we want to do an application. And the application can be in any language because it's just using REST API to talk to Camunda. In this case, I'm using Node.js as an example. And the Node.js application has a couple of things there which are relatively easy. I walked you through that in the code in a second. So the first thing I do is the BPMN model is part of the project. I deploy to Camunda whenever I start up to make sure it's deployed there. Then I have a small REST API I provide in order for a client to basically talk to me. That's a custom thing. And as soon as I get a request, I start a new process instance Camunda using the REST API. And then whenever the workflow instance arrives in that activity here, what I do is I use the so-called external task client. That's a JavaScript library Camunda provides in order to subscribe to that. So whenever a workflow instance arrives here, it basically gets kind of streamed into my Node.js application, and I can execute code there in order to do my console log, right? And that's more or less it. Let's go to my IDE, so you can use whatever you like there. I'm using Visual Studio Code at the moment for Node.js. The first thing is I don't have a lot of dependencies, so the external task client I talked about, I'm using request in order to do REST requests, but whatever you like there will do. I use Express to provide a REST API, but the same thing, you can use whatever you want to use there. That's it. And then if I go to my application, the basic things here are, first of all, whenever I don't configure anything, I connecting to a localhost 8080. That's the one I just started here in the background. So that's the default. You can override that by an environment variable, which we'll do in the PCF case, right? So that's this. Then I have my external task line connecting to Camunda. And then as soon as I do that, I can subscribe to the so-called sysout. What's that? So the BPMN is part of my project here. I open that in the modeler. And in this activity, we use what we call an external task, and there we can define a topic name, and the topic name is sysout. And that's what we're referring to. That means whenever something arrives here, we want to call that function. It's kind of a subscription mechanism, right? There we do our console log. We use data from the workflow there, and then we're saying, hey, we're done, please move on. And then the workflow will continue, and yeah, in this case, don't do much, right? Okay. Then we have a function to deploy the workflow. It's pretty much hard-coded, so I'm not scanning directories or anything. I just say, hey, this is our BPMN from the local directory. Please use that. Then I use the REST API from Camunda. So if you're going to the Camunda docs, you can see that actually there's the reference, the REST API, and then you see what it can do. For example, you can go to deployments, create a deployment, and that's exactly what we need to do in order to deploy my workflow. So this is what I do: engine default deployment create, and that's a multi-part form in order to attach all the files I need. I give it a name and so on and so forth, configure it a bit, read the real data, attach it to that, and that's basically it in order to deploy it. In order to start workflow instances, I'm doing different requests. In this case, I'm saying, hey, for this process definition with that key, I called it sysout. I probably used sysout too much here, but this is not referring to this, but the whole workflow definition, the whole BPMN model here has an ID. That's what I'm referring to here, right? It's also called sysout. And then I can attach or basically provide some variables, some data, which will be part of the workflow instance. In this case, some text, and that's what I can pass in as a parameter. So that's it. Whenever I start up the Node.js application, I make sure I deploy the workflow first. Then I will use Express in order to provide my REST API. Whenever this is triggered, I start a new process, and I just use some data from the requests I'm getting. And that's more or less it, right? What I can do, I can start that locally. So in my case, I can just go to the right directory saying npm start, right? I'm in that directory, and it will just start up that index.js I'm having here. What we can already see, we're now listening to 8090, so that works. And what we also see is that the deployment succeeded, so it deployed something in the background to the Camunda engine working on localhost here. What we could do is we could go to localhost 8080, looking at the Camunda web application, which was started as part of that Camunda service. Can go to cockpit. Demo, by the way, is the default user, which will work for you in that case as well. I have to do a browser refresh here, and can see what's deployed and so on and so forth, right? So I see my workflow here. That's pretty good. What we can do next is basically, if we go back to the README, we will have a nice handy curl request in order to send some data to that endpoint we just provided. So let's do that. And I go on to localhost 8090, I think, was it, right? 8090, right. Hello, right. So hello initiated, so that did work. If I look at that application, where we can see, hey, it started a process instance, and we see the sysout from the external task worker, right? So that's, if we go back, that's exactly the sysout from this guy, right? So we did a round trip by Camunda, it started a workflow, and we arrived here back. So my application is working, everything is fine. So let's take that onto PCF. I terminate that for a second. Let's check what Travis is actually doing. Travis is not doing anything, which is it's a pity. But let's don't wait for it. So normally it should just deploy it, but we can do that locally. At least I can do that easily. So if I go to engine as a service, what I can say is basically Cloud Foundry push. That should do, because I can figure out the jar file itself. And it should now deploy that on Cloud Foundry. Therefore, it uploads the jar file. That's what I said. It's just one jar file containing everything. That's relatively quick. And now it waits for Pivotal Cloud Foundry in order to provision that. It's a so-called Java build pack. So it will provision a container with the Java runtime and everything. That's totally transparent to you, so you don't have to care too much about that. So we're probably having to wait for that, but we could already see that happening here. So if I go to that application, I can also go to logs, where I can see what's happening in there. So sooner or later it comes up there. What we can prepare while we're waiting for that is we also want to deploy the Node.js application. So what we're currently running is the Camunda, so we're starting that up, but we want to run the Node.js application as well. So the same thing, it's relatively easy to do. We just have to push it, and there's again a manifest file for that application, but it's again just having the name. There's one important thing here. We're setting an environment variable to point to the right workflow engine, and therefore we have to check the route, pivotal create route. So that's the URL where we can access our application. It's not yet started up, that's why we cannot access it, but that's the URL we need here in order to connect to Camunda. There is a hint in the README and here in the stuff. I don't talk about that today too much, but you could use something which is called user-provided service instances on Pivotal Cloud Foundry. So what you could do is you could basically, let's say, promote this service of being, so this is a normal deployment, and you could promote it being kind of a service. And when you do that, you can attach a couple of attributes like, for example, credentials like username and password, but also the URL and the endpoint. And as soon as you do that with a couple of commands, what you could do here, you could just say services and then like point it to the name. And then Pivotal will do the same logic like we had with the database from Camunda towards the database, here from the Node.js service towards Camunda, and it will wire a lot of things automatically. You have to do a couple of things here, like you have to like include Cloud Foundry environment, and then you can like access a certain environment variable where you can get all the credentials, all the stuff from. So that would be definitely interesting possibility if you go down that route with Camunda and Pivotal Cloud Foundry. But I'm not doing that today, so I'm just giving it the REST endpoint here. So that's a manifest file. And then we are more or less ready to push it. Let's check if Camunda is up and running on Pivotal here. So let's check the logs. That looks actually pretty good. Let's do a refresh here. So we should see the web page the same as local. Pretty confident that this comes up. Right. So go to demo. Right. So we can see what's going on there. It should actually be an empty engine, so we shouldn't see any processes deployed. Let's quickly go there. Processes. Sorry, I had to do a browser refresh as well. No process definitions deployed. That makes a lot of sense. So as soon as we are going to the Node.js sample, we can now go for a Cloud Foundry push. It looks more or less the same, right? So it basically collects what it needs to collect and uploads that JavaScript stuff. It also packages the dependencies, like the Node.js dependencies, into kind of a zip file or whatever they do in the background. You shouldn't care actually, and then it uploads everything there. So what you can see here is now we're getting a second application. That's the, why did it crash? Shouldn't crash. Looks actually pretty good. It looks pretty good. So I'm not sure, probably that status is wrong. I have no idea. Let's quickly check if that's working. The same thing for the Node.js app, so we can just wait for that to happen. So it's now listening and it deployed successfully. So it's weird that it actually recognized that it's crashed. I'm not sure why, but ignore that for the moment. It didn't do that in my dry run. but I don't want to redo the whole recording for that. I check it out afterwards. So it deployed successfully in Camunda. So if I go back there, I should see my process actually being there. So there it is. That's the sysout. Awesome. And what I can do now, this one also has a root, right? So I can check that out. And where's my curl? We used to curl earlier on in order to go to localhost. And if I use the same curl now, not on localhost, but on that endpoint, the road /hello, it should actually work. It initiated, and we can see here, probably in the log, we should see the hello world, right? So it did work. The Camunda instance was started. It works perfectly together here. So that's basically what I wanted to show you today. So we'll go back to the overview picture. So we did deploy that as a Java application via the Java build pack. You probably can do that via CI/CD if Travis is not doing that forever. And then we have that available as a service, and then you can deploy the application in the language you like. I hope that helped you a bit to understand how that could work. If you have any feedback, I'm happy to take that. Just try it out yourself. Have fun with that. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.